Okay, Dave? I'll throw it away.
Just tear it right up.
All right, so I hope you enjoyed that video. How many have seen these videos before? Okay, and who hasn't? Okay, good. How about you guys haven't seen it? How are they so far?
Good.
Good? You liking them,
Great
Tommy?
stuff.
Yeah? Pretty cool? All right, so I know there's a lot of stuff we're throwing at you right now, but we're gonna get soon to you guys be able to participate in this, so right after this talk. I just want to introduce Dave, who will be talking about prayer as well, going with this video, and just another perspective on it. And it's good to see someone actually standing here, not just a recorded video, who's going to share, how prayer has worked in his life. So just a couple of points on Dave. He likes to call himself the Henry David Thoreau of our faith, and but he's also
Very modest.
Yeah, very modest. It is very modest.
Again,
He loves it. The only jokes that Matt's been laughing at is the ones when I'm poking fun at Dave. And so, Dave is the host of a podcast called Along the Way, and in fact, a number of the men that were in that video have been guests on his podcast. So, you may want to look that up. It's called Along the Way. But without further ado, my good friend Dave Fortin.
thank you. For you, Wednesday, March 24th, 2021 may have been just another day. But for me, it was the day I began living on borrowed time. I think it was in February when I disclosed to a close group of friends that I wasn't feeling well. I felt my health was deteriorating. I was really fearing the worst. I felt in my heart I was dying. This was a time when the COVID pandemic was not at its height, but was at a point where it had an effect on people's decisions, and it certainly did on me. I avoided walk-in clinics, doctor's offices, and even hospitals like the plague. Certain pre-existing conditions left me feeling vulnerable to certain death if I was exposed. For 2 or 3 weeks, I had been going through these severe pains in my upper back, chest, shoulders. The pain was so bad at work that during the day I'd just have to go and sit in my work truck until the pain would subside. But then this horrible pain started to wake me up at night, and every effort I made to reduce the pain with Bengay and heating pads was an exercise in futility. I attributed this pain to a neck surgery that I had many, many years ago, and I thought I was just sleeping on it wrong. I attributed the shortness of breath to allergies and started taking allergy medicine, but to no avail. That Wednesday morning, though, as I was loading all my equipment into my work truck, was when the pain became more than I could bear. I was in the garage, and the chief of surveys came walking across the parking lot and into the garage. He had this look of concern on his face, and he asked me, "Are you okay?" And I said, "No." I said, "I think I need to go home." He asked if you should take me to the hospital. I said, "No, I just want to go home, and I just want to lay down." So he drove me home, and I wanted to lay down, but the pain just kept getting worse and worse, to the point I just couldn't take it anymore. Well, within an hour, I was in Manchester Hospital with so many connections to more machines and testing equipment than I could count. The test confirmed the doctor's initial diagnosis, and I'm sure what every one of you is thinking right now, but it was what I was denying: a heart attack. The test showed that my heart had been damaged, and the reality of my situation could no longer be denied. A new level of fear had now overcome me. I asked the doctor if I was going to die. His response was comforting. He said, "Not on my watch." However, 15 minutes later, that doctor told me that he was transferring me to St. Francis Hospital in Hartford. That was a joke. I did not feel comfortable after that. But anyways, he told me that they'd stabilized my situation and they were going to prepare me for transport to St. Francis by ambulance. When I arrived at St. Francis, The battery of tests continued. More and more needles, more electrical connections, and more machines. The testing continued throughout the day, and no one could give me a definitive answer to the question, am I going to be all right? That night, when the buzz of the daily operations had quieted, I asked the nurse to open the curtain that covered my window. I found myself alone in the darkened room with only the lights of the monitor displays lighting my room, and the lights of the city beyond the glass peering in. I was trying to come to terms with my still uncertain future. At this point, the amount of damage to my heart was still unknown. As I lay there, not praying any formal prayers, just asking God and speaking to God from the heart, I was asking Him for His help through this scary situation I was in. So many people will quote Padre Pio of Petrocina, where he says that worry is useless. I disagree with him, because it was in those moments of worry and uncertainty that I turned from the formal prayers of the Rosary and the Divine Mercy Chaplet to just talk to God and to just tell Him, I'm afraid, I feel lonely. And because of nobody's fault, because of COVID, I felt abandoned. And that's the way I finally drifted off to sleep that night. In my distress, I called out to the Lord. I cried out to my God. From His temple, He heard my voice. My cry to Him reached His ears. Psalm 18, verse 7. The next morning, as the hospital services became that constant buzz again, I woke up with the uncertainty of what the day would bring. The question, will I need surgery to repair my damaged heart, kept going through my mind. I lay there wondering if because of COVID, would I have to go through this alone? As I tried to open my eyes and let them adjust to the light, the city that beyond the glass that was only an hour ago was dark, was now beginning to come alive. And that is when I noticed a prominent building off in the not so far distance, St. Joseph's Cathedral. In that moment, I felt I was given a grace of understanding, that I was in St. Francis Hospital. It symbolized to me Christ was with me, and the cathedral represented to me that Christ was watching over me. I would like to tell you that my prayers and this grace that I've received miraculously melted away all my fears and concerns, but it didn't. My consolation was that I was not going to have to go through this alone. Jesus was both with me and watching over me. I don't know how I ever thought I was going to go through this alone. The next day was just a constant parade of doctors and nurses. The constant interruptions would not allow me to dedicate any real time to formal prayer. So I continued to pray from the heart. It was like a son talking to his father. It was like a father-son relationship being rediscovered. I was discovering I had things to say to him, and like the grace of understanding I had received, he was listening and responding to me. I knew that he was hearing my prayers because I began to get a flurry of text messages and friends wishing me the best and a speedy recovery. Even the bishop of Killaloe, Ireland, prayed for my return to health. More about that later. About late morning, my cardiologist came in and discussed my situation with me. Finally, answers. They explained that the testing had shown that the lower portion of my heart was only working at about 30% of what it should be. It also showed a blockage in my heart, in my artery, and a stent would have to be placed in my heart. They scheduled a procedure for later that evening, and I should be ready for it. What that meant was I couldn't eat. I couldn't eat before the procedure. But then I got the best news I could get. The hospital would allow me to have a visitor. I was only allowed one visitor in my room at a time because of COVID restrictions. Later that afternoon, I was able to hold my wife's hands, something I hadn't done since they put me in the ambulance at Manchester Hospital. It was there that I was told in no uncertain terms that I was going to start living a healthier lifestyle. I don't know what I would do without Lori, and that is why I missed her so. Next came my son, Mike. We spent some quality time together talking about a hopeful future. It was him that first said to me, "This is a wake-up call, Dad." Finally, I know I'm blessed to have a wonderful family and a friend that is more of a brother to me than anything else. My friend Larry has since answered the call to the priesthood, but when he was a transitional deacon, he too came to visit. We talked about my prognosis. I told him about the upcoming procedure as I did with Lori and Mike. But Larry came armed with a book of blessings, and he began to pray over me. God, in his overwhelming abundance, had taken away the loneliness, even though I would soon have to be, I was going to be faced with this upcoming procedure by myself. It was confirmed to me in so many ways that God was with me. That evening, as my time drew closer for my procedure, I began to feel anxious. I said to God, I know you're with me. I know that you hear me. Please take this from me. It was about an hour later that the nurse came in and told me that the procedure had been postponed due to an emergency case that had just come in. My procedure is now rescheduled for tomorrow. So I called Lori to let her know the change in plans. I told her how tired I was, and I was going to try to get some sleep before they would wake me in the night for their normal rounds. I told her I loved her and said goodnight. Again, my room was darkened, and the lights of the displays reflected off the glass, and the city lights that peered in outlined the cathedral. Knowing that Jesus was in that building, it became for me a tabernacle, and I began to pray prayers of adoration, prayers of thanksgiving, and prayers of worship. That is how I went to sleep that night. I slept through the night with only a few interruptions from the nursing staff. The next morning when I woke up, I was told that I was going to have my procedure done later that evening. But that afternoon, something happened, and the usual buzz that surrounded my room now centered on me. Machines were being disconnected from here and reconnected there. Something happened that moved me up on the line of these planned procedures. I had only a couple of minutes to call Lori to tell her the changes of plans. The good thing was, I wasn't going to have to go through the hours of anxiety I thought I was going to. Then they wheeled me into a room where everything was so big and loud and covered with plastic. I was literally placed on a drop cloth. Then the connections to these machines started to come online, and I could hear the rhythm of my heart beginning to beat faster and faster. I started to panic and asked the staff if I really needed this. They assured me that everything was going to be okay, that they were going to give me something to ease my discomfort and fear. It was then that I blocked out all the loud noises and the pressure that I was feeling as the procedure began. I asked Jesus to help me through this. I asked him to continue to watch over me as he had been. I kept repeating, Jesus, I trust in you, over and over and over and over again. And finally, when the noise of the medical devices had reached a crescendo and my fear and discomfort brought me to the brink of a complete emotional breakdown, then, finally, the procedure was over. I returned to my room both physically and emotionally exhausted. I was given instructions by the doctor that after this procedure I would have to lie still for 4 hours. All I wanted to do was call Lori and tell her that I was okay. My exhaustion made sleeping that night easy. Even when the staff woke me to check my bandages, I went right back to sleep. After 4.5 days of what I will say is the best cardiac care in the state, I was released from the hospital. Over the next couple of weeks, as I recuperated at home, I began to think about how close I came to dying, and remember to promise the same Michael the Archangel I had made years ago. I promised if he would give me the strength at my death to call out to Jesus, that I would make his chaplet known to people. I remember how I had printed some pamphlets showing how to pray the St. Michael chaplet. Sadly, I never distributed them like I had planned to. Motivated now by a reality that I am really going to die someday, and a desire to keep a word to a saint that I felt has always been there for me, I knew I had to do something. But what? At that time, it had been a little over a year that my good friend Dave Imhoff and I had been producing a podcast called Along the Way, Casual Conversations with Interesting People. I'm the host, and Dave is my co-host / producer. We have been publishing these pre-recorded shows with guests from all over the United States and Ireland. In fact, the day I had my heart attack, I had to call Dave and tell him that I was not going to be able to fulfill the schedule of 3 one-hour-long videos or interviews in a 25-hour period. Dave contacted each of the scheduled guests to let them know of my situation, including the Bishop of Killaloe, Ireland. This podcast has been a fulfillment of a childhood dream that I never had the confidence to do: radio. The situation reminded me of the words of the 19th century poet Henry David Thoreau. Go confidently in the direction of your dreams. Live the life you've imagined. I've always believed this, but since I now feel I live on borrowed time, I feel more a sense of urgency, because it is in those dreams that we find our true passions, passions that guide us to discovering why we were put here. So I begin to get up every morning at 4:30 to be on Facebook Live for 5 o'clock, and to do a live show featuring the St. Michael Chaplain. It's called This Morning with your host, Down the Hall Dave. After a few weeks of it, at 5 o'clock, it got moved to 6, and my prayer requests began to grow. The analytics of this daily podcast show that it has far surpassed the 100 pamphlets I had printed out for local distribution. The harvest is indeed great, but the laborers are few. Pray therefore, Lord of the harvest, to send forth laborers into the harvest. Matthew chapter 9, verses 37 and 38. My goal is to evangelize as best I can, to be one of those that answers the call to labor in the fields and to pray for others. People have reached out to me and encouraged me and asked me to pray for them. Since my heart attack, since I began living on borrowed time, the importance of my relationship with God has become even more meaningful. I have learned at an even deeper level that prayer is about relationship. Scripture tells us in the book of Genesis that Adam walked with God in the cool of the day. And the Catechism of the Catholic Church quotes St. Teresa of Lisieux, where she says, "For me, prayer is a surge of the heart. It is a simple look towards heaven. It is a cry of recognition of love, embracing both trial and joy." There are many forms of prayer in our faith and devotions that have been passed down throughout Catholic history, whether it be the Liturgy of the Hours, the Rosary, or one of the many devotional chaplets that help us focus our attention on the mysteries of life. I encourage you to find one that inspires you. For me, the Rosary made me answer God's call back to the church. The St. Michael Chaplet is a constant reminder to persevere in faith through life's battles. But it is what I call going into the wilderness of prayer and praying from the heart that I must not forget. I would like to encourage you to walk with God in the cool of your day, to turn your gaze back towards heaven. I encourage you to not just see God as your Father, but as your Dad, and build that relationship with Him. If you are happy, be happy. If you are afraid and feel abandoned, if you are angry, share that with Him. And if you are afraid and feel abandoned, just know that He is listening. Just pray honestly. Pray from the heart. Remember, that prayer is about relationship, and it is one of the most important keys to standing in the breach. Thank you.